Okay. So today we're going deep into something really fascinating.
Yeah.
A public forum for the upcoming mayoral election in Ota City in 2025.
Interesting.
We've got these transcripts from YouTube, and it features the three candidates vying for the mayor's seat. Mr. Seigi Shimizu, who's the current mayor, Mr. Masanobu Hozumi, who used to be in the prefectural assembly, and then Mr. Atsushi Ibi, a former Midori city council member. And our goal today is to really dissect this forum, go beyond just the campaign speeches and try to figure out what these candidates are really saying about where Ota City stands right now and what their vision for its future is.
It's always so interesting to see what you can glean from these kinds of events.
Exactly. So we're going to look at their priorities, how they responded to questions from the people attending the forum, and just get a sense of what's important to them. The forum itself was pretty structured. They had self-introductions from each candidate and then moved into discussions around 5 key questions from the audience. Those questions covered a pretty wide range. Stuff like goals they thought they could achieve in a 4-year term, their fundamental beliefs about politics, and what they see as the future of Oka. So let's just jump right in with those self-introductions. Mr. Ibi definitely had a memorable way to kick things off, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It wasn't what I expected. What was your take on his self-introduction? It was pretty unique.
Yeah, so he starts by saying he has nothing compared to the other 2 candidates. He really played up the whole outsider angle, emphasizing that single term he served on the Midori City Council, even called his election a miracle.
It's certainly a way to stand out.
Oh, yeah. He even brought up that he was elected with the lowest number of votes out of all the winning candidates, and that someone below him actually lost for a really strange reason, which I won't go into here. It was really not your typical political intro. But then he kind of pivots and talks about his admiration for Shozo Tanaka and this whole idea that anyone who can afford the deposit can run for office. But almost immediately, he starts criticizing money-driven politics. So you get this very strong sense right from the beginning that his campaign is all about being a sort of a rebel challenging the establishment.
Definitely sets the tone for his whole approach. He wants to position himself as different.
Right. And he kept hammering that point home throughout his introduction. He was really pushing this idea of genuine dialogue and putting citizens first. It seemed like a very deliberate attempt to connect with voters who are maybe disillusioned with traditional politics or feel like their voices aren't being heard.
Smart strategy, especially in a local election.
Totally. Then we hear from Mr. Shimizu, the incumbent mayor. His introduction was like the complete opposite. It was all about highlighting the positive things happening in Ota City under his leadership. He just rattles off all these statistics. A growing population from 200,000 to 223,000, a huge jump in employment from 35,000 to 48,000.
Yeah, he really wanted to showcase those successes, present Ota as a city on the rise.
Exactly. I mean, those are concrete numbers that probably resonate with voters who've seen the city grow and maybe benefited from those changes.
They're tangible proof of progress.
Right. He even brought up this 20th anniversary Daiku concert. I think it was a symphony concert that had like 3,000 people attending. Like, look how vibrant our city is. His whole message was, things are going well, why rock the boat? It felt very much like a classic incumbent strategy. I've got experience, I've delivered results, trust me to keep things moving in the right direction.
Makes sense. Why change what's working right?
Right. And then there's Mr. Hozumi. He kind of took a middle ground approach. He acknowledged that Mr. Shimizu had done some good things, but then quickly shifted to talking about the need for a smooth baton touch, saying it was time for fresh ideas after such a long period under the same leadership.
That's an interesting way to frame it. Respectful, but also implying a need for change.
Totally. He also talked about his background running nursing homes and how that motivated him to get into politics, specifically to advocate for better policies in the areas of welfare and elder care.
That personal experience is definitely going to appeal to a specific segment of voters.
For sure. And he brought up a really interesting point that I think is often overlooked in local elections. He said that after a while, under one leader, some voices might start to get drowned out, and that change can help bring those voices back to the forefront. It was a subtle critique of Mr. Shimizu's long tenure, but a valid point nonetheless. And then he went on to talk about the importance of securing the labor force for Otada, which is a major industrial city. So he was showing that he's thinking about the practical economic challenges facing the city as well.
It's a good mix of appealing to different segments of voters while also demonstrating an understanding of the city's needs.
Yeah, I thought so too. So just from those introductions, we've got 3 very distinct narratives emerging. You've got the outsider pushing for radical change, the experienced leader touting his successes, and the newcomer promising a smooth transition and a more inclusive approach. It really sets the stage for the rest of the forum.
Definitely. It's like they're each appealing to a different aspect of what voters might be looking for.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next part of the forum, where they were asked about specific promises they thought they could realistically achieve in a 4-year term. Mr. Shimizu was pretty straightforward, promising to establish Kiryu University within that time frame. He talked about it being a digitally focused campus and how it would boost the value of the South Exit area. So, a major infrastructure project tied directly to the South Exit, which is interesting because it comes up again later as a major concern for the community.
Yeah, that's a big promise. A new university, especially one with that kind of technological focus, could really have a ripple effect on the city.
Right. It could attract young people, stimulate innovation, and definitely revitalize the local economy. The fact that he tied it so explicitly to the South Exit suggests a pretty strategic approach to urban development, too.
Seems like he's thinking long-term.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Hozumi's main promise was focused on making the city government more transparent. He talked about increasing face-to-face interactions, using online platforms for dialogues between the mayor and citizens, and even giving more power to the city council.
So less about bricks and mortar and more about how the city is run.
Exactly. It's all about transparency and citizen participation. And that message likely resonates with voters who feel like they're being left out of the decision-making process or that things are happening behind closed doors.
It's a different kind of promise, but one that could be really appealing to a certain segment of the electorate.
For sure. And then Mr. Eby, sticking to his outsider persona, said that if someone committed to what he called life politics was elected, every single action they took would count.
Life politics, that's an interesting phrase. What do you think he meant by that?
It's a little vague, but it conveys a sense of deep personal commitment, like he's all in. And to reinforce that image, he made 2 very specific promises. He pledged to cut his own salary in half and to serve only 1 4-year term.
Those are bold moves, especially for a politician.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical campaign rhetoric. It reinforces this image of him as an unconventional, maybe even selfless candidate. He also mentioned focusing on reforming the South Exit area, so that issue was clearly on his radar as well.
So we're starting to see a pattern here. The South Exit seems to be a hot topic for all the candidates.
Yeah, and that takes us right into the next part of the forum where they discuss the South Exit area, specifically Minami Ichiban-gai. It's clear from the questions from the audience that this is a really important issue for the people of Ota.
It seems like it's a focal point for a lot of different concerns.
Right. Mr. Shimizu started by explaining that because the land in the South Exit is privately owned, the city can't just force businesses out, which is something some people have apparently been calling for. He said his strategy is to transform the area into a more park-like space, hoping that attracting young people and university students will naturally lead to a positive change in the existing businesses.
So a more indirect approach, trying to encourage change through revitalization.
Exactly. It's a long-term strategy, and it relies on the idea that as the area becomes more attractive to a different demographic, the businesses will adapt to cater to those new customers.
Makes sense, but it might take a while to see any real results.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Now, Mr. Hazumi agreed that the area needs to evolve beyond just drinking establishments, but he questioned whether it should be the absolute top priority, especially when you consider the urgent need to secure the labor force for Uehara's industries.
So a more pragmatic approach, focused on the economic realities of the city.
Exactly. He was basically saying, look, we need to make sure people have jobs and that our industries are thriving before we start pouring resources into beautification projects.
It's a valid point, especially in a city like Ota that relies so heavily on its industrial base.
Right. Now, Mr. Eby was much more critical. He didn't hold back at all, accusing Mr. Shimizu of neglecting the South Exit during his long time in office and calling it a major wound for the city. He was really passionate about this, urging all the candidates to commit to reforming the area with their life on the line.
Strong words. Clearly, he sees this as a deeply felt issue for the community.
Absolutely. He was tapping into a sense of frustration and disappointment among the people who live there. Then Mr. Shimizu responded by providing some context. He talked about how businesses in the South Exit had declined despite past efforts to revitalize the area and outlined a renewed plan for a comprehensive revitalization that would integrate with the new university and encourage existing businesses to adapt.
So he's acknowledging the problem, but also presenting a new approach.
Exactly. He's trying to show that he understands the concerns and is taking steps to address them. And he's also trying to highlight the interconnectedness of his plans. The new university, the revitalized South Exit, and the overall economic growth of the city. It's a more nuanced argument than just saying, we'll fix it.
I can see why he felt the need to address Mr. Ibe's criticism head on.
Totally. Let's move on to something a little more philosophical now.
Yeah.
How each candidate defined the very concept of politics.
Okay, this would be interesting.
Yeah. So Mr. Hazumi described politics as engaging with citizens, understanding their concerns, creating a vision to solve problems, implementing that vision, and continuously working to make things better. He also emphasized the role of the mayor as someone who's looking ahead and preparing for the future.
A very citizen-centric and forward-thinking definition.
Definitely. It emphasizes listening to the people, developing solutions based on their needs, and always striving for progress. It's a very action-oriented definition, too.
Fits with his overall message of taking the baton and moving forward.
Right. Mr. Ibe, predictably, defined politics as being fundamentally about rights and responsibilities. He tied it back to major historical events that were influenced by political decisions, and, of course, he brought up the issue of flawed elections. He argued that reforming elections is crucial for improving politics as a whole, which in turn impacts everyone's lives. So for him, it all comes back to ensuring a fair and democratic process.
It's a very principled stance, focused on the foundations of good governance.
Exactly. And it ties back to his whole campaign message of challenging the establishment and fighting for the people. Now, Mr. Shimizu's definition was much more personal. He described politics, especially at the local level, as being a happiness producer.
Happiness producer. That's an interesting choice of words.
Yeah, it's definitely memorable. He talked about how the role of the mayor is to support people in their pursuit of happiness by creating a better living environment for everyone. So it's a very direct connection between politics and the well-being of individual citizens.
It's a very humanistic approach, focused on the individual experience.
Exactly. And it fits with his whole message of building a city that respects and values its people.
It's fascinating to see how those different definitions of politics really reflect their overall platforms and priorities.
Totally. It's like a window into their core beliefs about what government should be and do.
Yeah, it goes beyond just specific policies and gets to the heart of their philosophies.
Absolutely. So the next question from the audience was about specific policies for families with young children.
A key issue in any city, but especially one like Ota that's trying to attract new residents.
Definitely. Mr. Hazumi started by acknowledging the positive measures already in place, like free medical care for children and free school lunches. But he also pointed out that there were still challenges that needed to be addressed, like the issue of school absenteeism and the need for more support for families who choose alternative forms of education. So he was acknowledging the progress that's been made while also highlighting areas where there's still work to be done.
A balanced approach, recognizing both the successes and the remaining challenges.
Yeah. Mr. Ibe, in keeping with his overall style, focused more on the spirit of supporting families rather than specific policies. He brought up this historical term, kosudat dojin, which translates to something like child-rearing merchant.
That's an interesting reference.
Yeah, he used it to emphasize the idea that parents should be seen as experts in raising their own children, and that the government's role is to support them in their efforts. So it's less about specific programs and more about a fundamental shift in how we view and value the role of parents.
A very philosophical approach, as usual.
Right. Now, Mr. Shimizu, on the other hand, was very specific in his response. He talked about the city's existing support for families, including things like unlimited diaper usage, which he pointed out was based on direct feedback from citizens. He also mentioned non-repayable scholarships for students and upcoming programs called Papa Mama Refresh, which are designed to support the well-being of parents. He was very detailed in his response, and he also directly addressed this idea that citizen voices aren't being heard by highlighting things like budget explanation meetings and these Jibungoto Kaigi, which are like my own business conferences, where citizens can participate in shaping the city's development.
So he's countering any potential criticisms by showcasing the concrete things the city is already doing.
Exactly. He's saying, look, we are listening to families, and we're taking action to address their needs.
It's a good strategy, especially when you're facing an opponent like Mr. Ibe, who's making that lack of responsiveness a central part of his campaign.
Totally. So moving on to a broader perspective, the candidates were asked about their overall vision for Ota City's future.
The big picture question.
Yeah. Mr. Ibe, unsurprisingly, brought it right back to his core issue, electoral reform. He expressed his hope that Mr. Shimizu, as the long-serving incumbent, would acknowledge past mistakes, specifically referencing the issues with the South exit and the Heisei merger, and commit to changing how elections are run in the city. So for him, the future of Ota is tied to fixing the political process itself.
It all comes back to that fundamental belief in the importance of fair and democratic elections.
Right. Now, Mr. Hazumi had a more concrete vision. He sees Ota remaining a hub for the automotive industry, but evolving into a more technologically advanced city, embracing things like data and ICT. He talked about the need to attract skilled workers, establish research centers, and even potentially improve transportation links with Tokyo. So his vision is about modernization, diversification, and making Ota more attractive to a wider range of people.
A vision built on progress and adaptation.
Exactly. And then Mr. Shimizu focused on building a city that prioritizes its people, especially families with young children, which he believes is key to attracting new residents and creating a thriving community. He highlighted programs like the one at Ota Technical High School that trains foreign workers in collaboration with Subaru and Gemma University, emphasizing the importance of staying informed about the city's existing initiatives. So his vision is about continuing on the current path, focusing on human-centered development, and building on the city's strength.
A vision of continuity and sustainable growth.
Yeah, so 3 distinct visions for the future, each reflecting the candidate's core values and priorities.
It's interesting how those visions align so well with their earlier definitions of politics.
Totally. It shows how those core beliefs really inform their entire approach to governing.
Absolutely. Now, there was a really interesting question from the audience about bringing in experts from outside the government, specifically referencing Trump's appointment of Elon Musk.
Yeah, I remember that. Mr. Eby, while not directly addressing the question about external experts, used it as an opportunity to criticize Trump's education policies and then pivoted to talking about the importance of human-centered education in Opata. He also circled back to criticizing Mr. Shimizu's perceived detachment from the people, reiterating his call for a mayor who truly listens to the citizens. So he used the question to reinforce his core campaign themes.
Clever way to redirect the conversation.
Totally. Now, Mr. Hozumi expressed his interest in collaborating with business leaders, particularly those in the automotive sector, to focus on future trends like autonomous driving. This fits with his overall vision of embracing technological advancements and leveraging the expertise of local industries.
A practical approach, building on existing strengths and looking ahead to the future.
Right. And Mr. Shimizu was very supportive of the idea of utilizing external expertise, pointing out that Ota already does this, involving people from companies like Subaru on various committees and in administrative roles. He sees this as a way to bring efficiency and valuable knowledge to the government. So he was able to provide concrete examples of how the city is already doing what the question suggested.
A good way to demonstrate that he's open to new ideas and that the city is already taking steps in that direction.
Definitely. Then the discussion circled back to the topic of supporting families with young children.
That seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah, it's clearly a top concern for the community. Mr. Eby went back to his Kodakara Dojin analogy, emphasizing this idea that parents are the real experts in child rearing, and that the government's role is to support them, not dictate to them. Again, a very philosophical approach.
He's consistent in his message.
Absolutely. Mr. Shimizu, on the other hand, went back to talking about specific policies and programs, reiterating the city's commitment to lowering the cost of raising a family through various initiatives. He also highlighted this basic service philosophy, which aims to ensure equal access to essential services for all residents and lower the overall cost of living in Ota.
So he's back to focusing on practical solutions and tangible benefits.
Exactly. And Mr. Hozumi acknowledged the strong policies already in place, but added the dimension of safety, mentioning the possibility of subsidies for home security cameras. He tied this back to his broader vision of creating a city where families feel safe and supported, a place where children will want to return to even after they've grown up.
Adding that layer of emotional appeal, making it about more than just policies.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch. So we're nearing the end of the forum now, and they get to what's always a revealing question. What they see as the biggest problem facing Ota City.
The if you could fix one thing question.
Exactly. Mr. Hozumi's answer was very practical. He said the biggest problems are traffic congestion and the shortage of skilled labor, based on what he's heard from residents. So he's focused on issues that directly impact people's daily lives and the economic well-being of the city.
Very much in line with his focus on practical solutions and citizen engagement.
Totally. Now, Mr. Shimizu identified a more systemic problem. The difficulty in acquiring land for infrastructure projects, especially road improvements, because so much of the land is privately owned and residents are often reluctant to sell. He used this to explain why addressing the traffic congestion issue is so challenging, highlighting a very real constraint on the city's ability to make needed improvements.
It's a problem that a lot of cities face, especially older cities with established neighborhoods.
Right. And it's not an easy problem to solve. And then, of course, Mr. Ibi brought it right back to his core issue, saying the biggest problem facing Ota is the flawed electoral system and the unwillingness of the other candidates to acknowledge it or commit to reforming it. He used his final opportunity to urge them to make that promise, keeping the focus squarely on what he sees as the root of many of the city's problems.
Hammering home that central message one last time.
Exactly. And Mr. Shimizu, not letting that go unchallenged, directly addressed Mr. Ibi's earlier comments about his time in office. He explained that a 10-year limit remark he had made in the past was specifically in response to a controversial plan for a 21-story city hall, not a general statement about term limits. He then went on to argue that Ota has actually been improving under his leadership, pointing to things like decreasing debt, increasing savings, rising property values, population growth, and the successful redevelopment of certain areas, including parts of Minami Ichiban-gai. So he was both clarifying his past statements and presenting a counter-narrative of progress and achievement.
A strong rebuttal, using facts and figures to support his claims.
Yeah, it was a very deliberate attempt to push back against Mr. Ibi's narrative of stagnation and neglect.
Makes sense, especially in a forum where you're trying to win over voters.
Absolutely. And then, in their closing statements, each candidate had a chance to summarize their message and leave a final impression on the audience.
The final pitch.
Exactly. Mr. Ibi expressed his gratitude for the opportunity to speak, but reiterated his disappointment that neither of the other candidates had committed to electoral reform. He ended by passionately restating his belief that fair elections are the foundation of good governance and thanking the organizers and attendees.
A powerful ending, staying true to his message until the very end.
Totally. Mr. Shimizu focused on his vision for a human-centered city, emphasizing his commitment to listening to the needs of residents and managing the city's finances responsibly. He highlighted the various ways citizens can make their voices heard, mentioning things like Endai talk sessions and local radio programs. So he was trying to reinforce this image of himself as a responsive and responsible leader who's focused on the well-being of the people.
Reassuring voters that he's got their best interests at heart.
Exactly. And Mr. Hazumi expressed his gratitude for the forum and emphasized his commitment to taking responsibility for Ota's future, not just for the next 4 years, but with a long-term vision that extends beyond his potential time in office. He talked about creating a city that future generations will be proud of, a place where everyone can thrive.
A hopeful and inspiring message, appealing to a sense of shared responsibility for the future.
Totally. So, there you have it. A deep dive into the perspectives of the 3 candidates vying to lead Ota City. It was fascinating to hear them articulate their visions for the city, their approaches to governance, and their responses to the concerns of the community.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening.
Totally. We learned about the concrete progress Ota has made in recent years, the complexities of tackling long-standing issues like the South Exit redevelopment, and the fundamentally different ways these candidates define politics itself. It really makes you think about the importance of local elections and the impact they have on people's lives.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in national politics, but these local races are where so many of the decisions that directly affect us are made.
For sure. And it's so important to be informed about the candidates, their platforms, and their visions for the future. So as you reflect on what we've discussed today, think about what resonated with you the most. Which candidate's approach aligns best with your own values and beliefs? What aspects of their visions for Ota, whether it's revitalizing a struggling area, fostering economic growth, or promoting citizen engagement, might hold lessons for your own community or the issues you care about?
It's a great way to connect what we've learned here to our own lives and the places we live.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the challenges and opportunities facing Ota City are reflections of broader trends and issues that we're all grappling with, whether it's the role of technology in our lives, the importance of creating sustainable communities, or the very nature of leadership in the 21st century.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. They're not just about learning facts. They're about sparking conversations and encouraging us to engage with the issues that shape our world.